Hello and welcome to the third episode of Hey, Let's Art. That's Hey, Let's Art. Art like is being used as a verb. It's clever. I I am Alex Samoilov, and this is, if you are new or if you've forgotten, a sort of personal video podcast about painting and talking, I guess. That's pretty much what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be painting and talking. The usual, about whatever. Like, it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to follow a theme. Whoever wants to watch it or listen to it is absolutely welcome to do so. Whoever doesn't is absolutely welcome to not do so. There's so many wonderful things out there in the realm of online entertainment to watch and experience. You know, this is really not in the top echelon. Uh, but if you're here, the usual disclaimers. The sound is not going to be fantastic. I'm not a professional public speaker or entertainer or performer. I'm trying to get better with my filler sounds, like ums and likes and so forth, but they are going to happen. And at the same time, the microphone I'm using is not of the highest caliber. I actually have a pretty nice Blue Yeti, but it's too nice for its own good because I just cannot be bothered to figure out how to deal with my PC noise. So I'm really just using Open Broadcaster and Art Rage. And, I'm just sort of using the native recording functionality within Open Broadcaster, which, I'm sure is not the best, but it works for my purposes. So, if you're expecting some really good sound production or something, it's just not going to happen for now. Hopefully over time it's going to get better, especially as I sort of increase over time the general funding that goes towards my art and towards my work. I have various channels set up for that, and as that gets better, as other things get better, the sound will also naturally improve. For now, it's just sort of a matter of getting out there and doing something. That's the theme of the show, if this is to be called a show. The theme of the show is living with imperfection, working within imperfection, making imperfect things, and making, not necessarily for the sake of making, but for the sake maybe of growing or getting the experience from it. You really can't benefit from an absolute nothing. You can have the most perfect image built up in your head, but it really amounts to, what did I say, a hill of beans, or doesn't amount to a hill of beans, I guess, if it's just in your head, if it stays there. Okay, so I have been a little bit out of sorts lately, so I don't know how well this particular recording is going to go. I'm sure it's already, cracking into seams a little bit. But we're just gonna deal with that. If I have to edit some stuff, I'll edit some stuff. I hate doing that, to be honest. Right? Am I right? I mean, come on. So it's been a little while since I did one of these. I figured, hey, you know, every other time it's been on a Tuesday night. It happens to be a Tuesday night tonight. I happen to not really be in the best shape to do any more intensive work like programming or sort of any kind of high concept design stuff or whatever. So, this seems to be like kind of a weirdly chill thing to do right now. This seems to be a good time to get caught back up on this series. Hopefully I'll be able to upload this soon if it works out. And one other little thing that I'm doing right now is you'll notice I just kind of figured out how to get, at least I hope so, I've figured out how to get the whole window in my recording and without all of my sidebars and my awesome Steven Universe desktop background. So, I mean, if you liked that, I'm sorry, that's probably not going to show up this episode. Um, and obviously, that is not my stuff, so I can't really, I don't know the legality of all of that either. I definitely like to maintain the stuff that I present here as my own. I want to just kind of share my work as it happens and my art as it happens. um, you know I don't want to step on any toes copyright wise. Okay, so let's get started. I'm not, well, I mean, I've been started. I'm not entirely sure what this is over here, but um, it's kind of interesting. As you might know if you've watched the earlier couple of episodes, I sort of start off just kind of doodling without any real aim or purpose, just to kind of get back into the feel of things. Um, and Today is no exception. Oh dear, I thought I lost my mouse for a moment there. Um, I hope I don't need to replace this tablet anytime soon. So I just start off doodling. A lot of times surfaces are really nice and pleasant to do if you have some of the tricks of the trade there. So I enjoy doing them. So this is sort of a little bit of a kind of slightly tarnished silver surface, I suppose, like a little silver. Um, I don't know, like a ball, like a sphere, that is reflecting light in its silvery surface, and maybe it's a little bit dinged up here and there. So maybe today would be a good day to sort of talk a little bit about my experience with illusions in the virtual space of the canvas, or illusionism. Um, that was my favorite subject in college. Yes, that was a real class you could take. It was called illusionism. There was regular illusionism, and then there was advanced illusionism. Uh, I took regular illusionism once because you could only really take that once. That was a prerequisite course for advanced illusionism, and I believe you could take advanced illusionism as many times as you wanted, because it was really largely a studio course. So you would make different work each time. It's not like the skills that were taught in that class were interesting, and obviously there was a little bit of repetition there on that front, but ultimately, it was sort of a new thing every year. And I took that as many times as I possibly could. I don't think I think I took regular illusionism my sophomore year in art school. Art school's weird. It's like kind of like Hogwarts, but much more expensive. And when you get out, you don't have any superpowers or magical powers or anything. And it's in Baltimore, so but what was I saying? Oh yeah, I think I took it my sophomore year in college, and I just from the teacher is just fantastic. She's a fantastic artist in her own right. Susan Waters Ellers. What? Susan Water. I'm gonna look it up and link. I'm gonna put a link to her work. Susan. I'm gonna put a link to her work at the bottom of the page, at the bottom of the video. I've always said Susan Water Zellers because she was a hyphenated name. She, she was just fantastic. She made us, I mean, outside of just conveying just a really fascinating topic and like really taking it well beyond the skills that we were learning. Although we were learning like really well practical, but we were learning very specific skills that allow you to render um, or paint or draw in very specific ways. Techniques that could then be applied as you will at your pleasure and at your leisure uh, in a variety of different situations. But well beyond that, she sort of took the theoretical aspect of it to a whole different level. She was the discussions were just so engaging and interesting, and the lectures, we do have kind of lectures or slide lectures at art school, right? I just looked forward to them every single time, and it was just kind of a safe space, or at least that's the way I like to remember it. Like it was just a sort of place of safety. That once a week, for about 5 hours, lunch in between, or dinner rather in between, because it was an evening class. You go to a place that was, that felt very safe, and that felt accepting, and that didn't feel like high pressure, and at the same time felt like doing something important and learning things that are valuable. Uh, so anyways, I took that class. I mean, I took the regular illusionism my sophomore year. I took advanced illusionism, I believe, the year after. I think maybe like for both semesters. I can't remember a point in my um, college career after that first time that I wasn't taking the class, but I'm sure there were breaks in there. I'm sure I couldn't take it every single semester, but every chance I got, I was enrolled in that class. Um, and some of the things we learned were pretty handy. I'm not going to necessarily attempt to replicate any of that or instruct, um, but maybe I could talk about some of it from like a philosophical standpoint or the way I sort of approached it. Because again, it was a very sort of philosophically hefty class, believe it or not. Because what does it mean to sort of create illusions in or through image making, through drawing and through painting? It's like a sort of it's like the name of the class was illusionism. Like it's like a very very Hogwarts ish name. It's like a magical discipline of some kind, and in a sense, it was that because it deals with sort of tricking the brain I guess in a good way, believing that something is there that simply is not there. You know. So how to create illusions of depth, of volume, of edges, you know, and then how to subvert those illusions, how to break them in interesting ways, um, how to build surfaces, how to build um, or create the sense of distance, or the sense of closeness, or the sense of scale, you know. So how would you, for example, make a mountain look monumental in relation to a building or in relation to a person, you know? Well, one of the simple tricks to that, of course, is put the building and the person in the picture. And again, like I don't have a lot of material. I think Susan deserves 99.99999% of credit for like any of the iterations on her teachings that her students produce. Well, I mean, obviously we make our own work. She makes her own work, but like I think some of that stuff, she's much better at explaining. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. I'm pretty sure she was working on the book. I don't know if the book. I need to look into it, but I don't know if the book has materialized or if it's out yet. If it is, I'll look that up. Maybe talk about it next time or link it. But the material is just really, really interesting from so many different perspectives. Probably not to you, but it is to me. You know, um, or you know what? Maybe it is to you. I don't know. I'm like I said. I'm doing this today, sort of half unconscious. If I suddenly start talking about like magical hyenas with bat wings, or if I start talking about porcupines trying to marry my daughter, which I don't have a daughter, nor do I know any porcupines personally, that would be in line to marry anyone of the human persuasion. Like if I start doing that, just go with it, or turn us off or whatever, because that's the kind of show we're gonna have today. This is the kind of show we're going to be experiencing. Um, so let's you know what, I might just keep going with this particular drawing here. I might not even scrap it. Like, again, that's the kind of show we have today. It's all about just kind of getting on with life, just trying things out, just going with the stream of consciousness. Um, not really sure what I'm talking about or why, like not really sure what I'm drawing or why. So like a really interesting approach to doodling, maybe, right? I think that'll be appropriate for today, you know. Uh, and who knows, we may switch this up sometime in the middle of the episode. We might not. Anything is possible. Anything can happen. So I think I'm gonna go for like a double illusion. I'm gonna create like all kinds of weird effects today. Um, so yeah, I mean, like in a sort of traditional sense, the techniques, so many of the techniques that we learned in that class would be referred to as trompe-l'oeil techniques. That's the French for trick the eye, tricking the eye. There's a long tradition of that, of course, going back probably well on into ancient antiquity, into ancient Greece and Rome and etc. It's hard, I believe, for us to know that for sure, because very little in the way of painting survives from that time period. Paint isn't the most archival material. The sculptures are, I mean, survive fairly well, or a lot of them do, because it's stone and marble, and that's pretty archival if nothing terrible happens, and barring for earthquakes and wars and other cataclysms. But paint simply fades with time, and there's been a lot of time between now and then, and the kind of paint they used probably wasn't specifically fabricated or specifically created to last a long time. Interesting note, a lot of the statues, sculptures that you would see from ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And I think nowadays a lot of people already know this. I think this was a little bit more of a mind-blowing thing a little while ago. I think these days it's becoming a little bit more established knowledge. But in case you weren't aware, the statues, like you would see in museums, or that you would kind of see reproduced in environments that require that kind of classical, neoclassical adornment. A lot of them actually were originally painted, and you often guess that they would be painted in bright colors. And not clear, but I think they were intended to sort of look somewhat realistic, at least in the sort of in the face and the skin and so on. So there probably were eyes painted on them. There'd probably be a skin tone applied, and so like if you would go into an ancient Greek temple, you probably would imagine, like nowadays even still, people would probably imagine like going into a place of white marble, and sort of a very pristine and clean and gleaming white, place. But that actually was not their style. That was not how they did things. It's not how things looked. Things were colorful and um, sort of almost like supposed to be vibrant and vivid and like alive. I suppose in a way, a lot of the statues, sculptures were supposed to kind of bring the Greek gods and the heroes and whoever else was depicted to life. And then, of course, we didn't know that for many, many years. We just assumed that the sculptures were made that way. They were made white and, marble because the paint just wore off. They just ended up eventually over time, like losing all the color completely. So that's how we imagined it without until they did some spectroscopy, whatever. I don't know, some kind of studies on it or something. I actually don't know the details on how they figured it out, but they did figure out that they used to actually paint them, which I think is like really an interesting. It's an interesting commentary on our perception of history and how that all kind of works together. Like how we assemble our vision of what the world was like before we existed from sort of these bits and pieces, these sort of incomplete like half-truths and false and absolute falsehoods sometimes, you know so that's I don't know, that's kind of fascinating. But yeah, anyways, from what we can gather, they some of the murals I think survive and so on. There was an attempt at naturalism, and I think from that there's sort of again a natural tendency, I think, to try to emulate through a two-dimensional form the way we see or perceive three-dimensional reality. So that I suspect that's been around since art itself has been around in some form. you know um, and one thing I like about just doing these weird little abstract bits of abstract illusionism, or attempted illusionism. Obviously, I'm not necessarily amazing at it myself. Is that it's kind of soothing. It's a way for me to actually, believe it or not, kind of get a little bit of actual, I don't know, relaxation or catharsis from my painting, and I'm actually not concerned about making it look like a thing, look like a thing that I can recognize in the real world as like, oh, that's a person's face, so that's I don't know, a seashell, that's a book, that's a page, and instead just sort of focus on making these sort of abstract forms or collages that kind of resemble things but don't necessarily have a function or sort of an assigned form or anything like that. They just sort of they exist for their own sake, in a weird sort of way. So it's a kind of in between, like abstraction and representation state. I find that to be much more relaxing because, yeah, again, I don't have to worry about likeness. I can just sort of worry about some of these like little nitty-gritty technical details, like the scattering of light, and the light doesn't have to be realistic necessarily because it could come from multiple sources, or where it comes from is sort of completely up to my imagination. So obviously this is going to be, as usual, a very like, I'm not going to have like a beautiful photorealistic thing at the end of this. Regardless of any trompe-l'oeil sort of aspirations today. Just because, we have a limited amount of time, and I'm not, I'm not necessarily that kind of painter. I just sort of dabble in a lot of different things, so I try to do figurative work. I try to do trompe-l'oeil work sometimes, of some kind of some sort. I try to do abstract work just because I think it keeps me, engaged and keeps me sort of learning things, and opening me up to different possibilities. So, but then I think my standard sort of mode of operation is really more in the, I guess. Representational expressionism realm of things. So I tend to have representational aspects to my work, but they often are done in a very expressionistic manner. So lots of imprecision on purpose, bold brushstrokes and little tiny itty bitty brushstrokes and squiggles and weird stuff and so on. So, this isn't necessarily me pretending that or I make no claim that this is my wheelhouse by any stretch of the imagination. Um, there's a really interesting movie. Well, I don't know. Interesting. It's it's a little heavy, I suppose, in a way, or it's not as depressing or heavy as some things. Maybe it's just about art. So it's not, you know. I think it's depressing if you're an aspiring artist, because it's about it's about that struggle. It's about a lot of things, actually. I think it's called Waiting for Hockney. Um, and, thing about thing about depression and so forth is sometimes your brain it just doesn't do things that you want it to do. So I can't. It's not, a lot of times memory and things like that. I can't exactly remember. Was it? What was Hockney's first name? I like the art. I like his work. He's a really interesting artist, and he's a very important artist. And I'm blanking on. Is it? Anyways, again, I'll probably link it. Maybe not. Is it Edward? Is it what? Everybody Edward? I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like I'm saying, I don't. You know. Sometimes you'll get this version of me. Um, yeah. So in this particular case, I actually have very few names to give you. The movie is called Waiting for. I think it's called Waiting for Hockney. And interesting side note: the subject of the film was also one of Susan's students. Um, the same teacher I was just talking about. He actually went to the same college that I did. Um, and he was, very. I think he was one of her disciples, I suppose, in a sense, because he was really into that kind of illusionistic depiction. And his project, he sort of decided to. I'm not entirely sure where where the decision came from or what it was influenced by. There's some talk of that in the film, but it's been a couple of years since I've seen it. Um, but he decided to basically dedicate himself to kind of creating this masterpiece, this sort of next level, next generation, just drawing, just a drawing, a single drawing, using a sort of extreme, I suppose, application of a lot of the techniques that Susan talked about, sort of creating a depiction of Marilyn Monroe's face. um, it was, I think, a fairly average-sized drawing. It wasn't especially small, but it wasn't especially big. It was big considering what he was doing and trying to accomplish with it. So he was from a photograph. Marilyn Monroe's been dead for a while. She didn't sit for him. But it was kind of a fascinating process, like sort of listening to him talk about his expectations on the one hand, but also his approach to it from a technical perspective. So there's like sort of two aspects to that. And from a technical perspective, it's sort of, genius and madness commingling, or obsession and genius, in a sense, because he really took it to a very I mean, some would say extreme level. Or like the next level of attention to detail. He created very, very specialized, tiny graphite pencils for himself by essentially using sort of high magnification lenses, and whittling down regular graphite to like perfectly fine points. Like, I don't know, it's like almost atomic, in its you know like it's almost like to the atom. It feels like was his goal. Like, obviously it's impossible to achieve it quite to that level, but it seems like that was what he was going for. Like just atomic accuracy. And he rendered her face for, oh, he worked on that drawing for years. I don't remember the exact number of years. It's, again, all I can do right now is recommend David Hockney. It's David Hockney, right? Isn't it? I think it's David Hockney. David Hockney is the artist, that he sort of not. So the gentleman that I'm talking about who did the Marilyn Monroe painting is not David Hockney. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to put his name at the bottom of the YouTube video thingy. Um, he seems like an extremely talented, awesome artist as well. Whether or not, unfortunately, the documentaries about how the Marilyn Monroe thing didn't quite work out, and so because he wanted to show it to David Hockney, and I think he expected some kind of response from Hockney, like, to comment or discuss, or not even discuss. I think he expected Hockney to, inaugurate him into art world success, which I don't think Hockney was able to do, nor was he aware that that was his sort of intended goal or the aspiration of the other artist, or the younger artist. So it was just a really, it's kind of depressing, a little bit quasi tragicomic, but the guys are really good. The artist that the documentary is actually about, not David Hockney, is also a very talented artist, and what he did with that Marilyn Monroe drawing was amazing. Despite the fact that ultimately what ended up happening was he ended up with a single drawing to show for years and years and years and years and years of his work, of his life. He had everything writing on that one drawing, and it was a very good drawing. It, you know, and you can get into sort of discussions of, painting versus photograph, and I think that was one of the issues, is that, like, literally he was drawing from a photograph, and then ultimately all he could do, even in the best of scenarios, was reproduce something that the camera managed to do without any real effort. I think that's, it's an interesting struggle. That's become a very interesting struggle in sort of the notion of sort of handmade art, or in the world of handmade art, since the advent of mechanical reproduction. Yeah, there's another essay. It's called "Art in the Time of Mechanical Reproduction," but I'm blanking on the guy's name, and it's some very important name. He was like a really big shot dude. Art in the Times of Mechanical Reproductions was an interesting essay about that. But anyways, I'm making so much work for myself right now. I'm definitely gonna put the name of the artist that movie was about, because he deserves the attention, which he's not gonna get because nobody watches these videos. So I'm cool. But just in case anyone watches these videos, I think he deserves the credit for doing that excellent, that dedication, and doing that excellent work, and working so hard for so many years. I'm definitely gonna put his name in there. I already told you it's David Hockney. If I'm wrong, then I'll put the correction at the bottom of the YouTube video. what else was I supposed to put at the bottom? Well, whatever. We'll figure it out. If you happen to watch this, just um, and I didn't put Susan's website. I'm definitely gonna put that at the bottom. Um, and anything else, like I'll try. But folks, I'm just doing my best here. That's that's all I can do. Um, and I'm not entirely sure what it is that I'm doing, so that's fun and interesting. Or for what audience, frankly. I mean, like, I think it's largely for myself. I like to talk. I like to pretend that there's an audience. I like the sound of my own voice. So even if there's no audience, like, I get a sort of gratification imagining one, you know. I think, especially when you're having like sort of tough times, which I can't say that mine are like tougher than ever or anything like that. I think, they're somewhere in the middle right now. It's been worse and it's been better, but I think sometimes it helps to imagine an audience, like a positive audience. You know, um, I teach part time, and I think one of the things that is enjoyable about that is well, let's be fair, it's kind of being the center of attention, but being able to communicate a part of yourself or being able to impart something that you know is in a way positive can really help out a lot. And again, like even if no one is listening, imagining that I think is a very can be if you're that kind of person can be a very positive visualization. So you can kind of think to yourself like, if you're having a really rough moment, or especially if you're feeling, I don't know, in a moment sort of small or dehumanized, because that can happen. Um, some of us are more exposed to that than others. You can kind of, visualize, an audience wanting to hear about your experience. I think I actually heard that also in Susan's class. I think that was. I mean, I didn't realize that when I started talking about it, but I think she talked about it at one point. Because she was very, or she is very interested in the brain and sort of the way the brain works. And again, she was a lot more in depth about it than I can ever be, or just based on my interest. I'm interested in it, but I'm not, that interested in the brain. But she, mapped it out. She drew it. She studied it obsessively, I guess. Just really, really getting into the idea of how the brain works. And because, her job was to trick it, right? So she was trying to see which parts of the brain, or trying to sort of theorize about which parts of the brain were involved in which types of observation or which types of experience, and how you could recreate certain kinds of experiences or simulate them or create emotion or whatever it may be. Through art, by sort of thinking about your goals in relation to the mind of the person you're trying to reach, or your own mind, because we have, and our brains are analogous to each other, even if everyone's very different. We have sort of analogous. We have very similar structures, and they work in very similar ways. So you have to assume that it's not just going to work for one person. But that whole trick about, not even trick, but that sort of idea of, trying to boost, I guess this, sort of in a sense, get your self-esteem up, is to try to they talk about this kind of thing a lot in sort of new agey circles, like imagining success and then becoming successful. It's not necessarily the case. I don't know. I'm, clearly not that successful. I mean, I do all right. For what my goals are currently. But it may not necessarily grant you success, but it's definitely going to make you feel better. If you really allow yourself that fantasy. You know, I think the kind of slightly tragic context. Well, not slightly. It's pretty tragic. I think she was talking about. I think again, I don't even know how to begin to search for this person's name at this point, but someone was in fact giving a speech in front of a large audience, and they were a fairly successful individual. I believe they were a scientist, very well regarded. But yeah, during World War II, this person was confined to, like many people were, because they were Jewish, I believe, confined to a concentration camp, and they were going through some very, very rough times, and they visualized themselves while they were in those very extreme, dehumanizing conditions, um, standing in front of um, like a rapt audience. Um, and talking about their experiences and talking about how they survived. And sure enough, eventually that did happen. They were able to do that. Not everyone was, of course. But I think that I can't guarantee that that's going to help anyone survive anything. But I think it's a way, potentially, if you're aware of what you're doing and if you're aware of your limitations and everything, it can be a nice little mood boost, a nice little way to move past a difficult time. There's a really good episode to get a little lighter. There was a really good episode of Doctor Who to that effect, I think reminded me of that thought, or consciously or not, where the Doctor is in a very difficult situation. Spoilers for Doctor Who if you haven't seen the most recent season. Peter Capaldi is really good. I really like him. I think he's my favorite Doctor in a while, and I really liked Matt Smith. I really did. I was really into Matt Smith, and David Tennant was good. Christopher Eccleston was good, but he was only there for such a short while that it was really hard for him to you know to make that full mark. But anyways, beside the point, this was the most recent Peter Capaldi episode. The episode is called not an episode, a season. It was the penultimate episode of the season, so the second to last part of the season finale, and it's called Heaven Sent, and it's just purely just a Capaldi episode. It's fantastic. He's trapped in, again, spoilers. So he's trapped in this sort of weird test reality, like some kind of chamber torture reality or something, where it's like a castle that he's the only one in, and he just sort of keeps going through these difficult scenarios that are sort of, I guess, intended to freak him out. And I think he says something to that effect at one point. Like there's all these different scenes of him, like about to go through like a really difficult situation, or about to die, or like falling out of a window, or almost drowning, or whatever, and you suddenly see him like walk into his TARDIS and like talk in a very sort of doctory, cheerful way, like about like, oh, here's how I did it, here's how I survived, and it was a really interesting. It's a really good character building moment, I think, there too. But because I think it was really a great development of that character. Because I mean, that character doesn't necessarily get developed in interesting ways that often. It's been around for so long that it's easy for a sort of weird amorphousness to get around him, or a sort of stagnation. But I just really enjoyed that, and I think that's one of those really resonant pieces that came out of that show. Like he says, "Imagine you've already survived. Imagine you're telling someone how you survived." You know what I mean? So it's like, I think it's a very it's there's something to that. There's something to that. Imagine having an audience. I think there was even a line like that. Like, I can't wait to see how I did it. I'm nothing without an audience. I think that was the exact quote. That's such a good episode. That's like one of the best episodes of Doctor Who, though. Heaven Sent. If you're gonna watch one episode of Doctor Who ever, ever, you should watch that one. Heaven Sent. I think which was the season 9, I guess, of the new series. So good. Man, it was so good, man. Gosh. Like, it got a little away from itself in some of the plot holes or whatever, but it's time travel, so what are you gonna do? Doctor Who is, I love Doctor Who. It's the only like sci-fi show I can get into, and it's only really the only show on the TV that's not like strictly a comedy that I can get into, because it's kind of because it's for kids. Let's be honest. I mean, like there's a lot of adults that are into it, and of course, it plays to the adult audience fairly well. But you know, I think the original show, the series was intended for kids. Um, it was, you know, it was intended to be educational series actually back in the day. That's why, in the William Hartnell era, they, very very first Doctor, he traveled with his granddaughter. Yeah, Doctor had a granddaughter. Um, so presumably he had been married at some point prior to River Song, or who knows? I mean, no, it has to be prior to River Song. Anyways, um, or maybe not married. He had a granddaughter. I don't know how Time Lords do it. You know, maybe for all we know, you know, she's directly his granddaughter by a direct line of descent. Maybe he gave birth to her mother, and her mother, who knows how Time Lords do it. Time Lords are, canonically, um, Time Lords are now canonically gender queer, I think. So it's pretty cool. At least you know, or gender fluid, or able to transition canonically. Anyways, I'm sorry. That makes me very happy. I am really happy to see that in the media, even if it is, as kind of, I don't know, maybe tongue in cheek, maybe a little bit. I don't know if it's presented in in a way that's necessarily the best level of representation. It's still kind of nice, just to the same extent that, like, the crystal gems from Steven Universe are canonically, um, I guess, agender or genderless. I don't remember what the writer or the creator of the show said. But anyways, that's beside was I talking about? Oh yes, he would travel with his granddaughter, and there was a there were two other companions. One was a history teacher, and the other one was a math teacher. No, not math, science. Sorry. Which they gave a little bit of a nod to that in the recent series where uh, God, I'm blanking on names of fictional characters now too. She's a really, the most recent companion. What was her name? I'm sorry. She was like, she had all kinds of Oz something. Clara Oswald. Clara, right. She was a teacher. And she was actually a teacher at the same school that the two teachers from the old series were teachers at. Anyways, so one of them was a science teacher, the other one was I believe, a history teacher, and so they would alternate different weeks. Like some one week they would do like a futuristic episode, and they would deal with some kind of science fiction um, concept like that would kind of be based on a real life scientific concept. Um, and then the other week they would go back in time, and it would be like a historical episode. So they would, like, encounter some figure or some you know group or some event from history. And so that was supposed to be kind of an educational series, but obviously it never was like super, all about it. It wasn't super committed to that idea. It was probably meant to be entertaining from the start, first and foremost. Um, but you know, it's good. It's really hit and miss. It's a really hit and miss show. Sometimes you get some really good stuff in there, like an episode that's like I thought Heaven Sent was just fantastic, just as a self-contained work of art almost. And then sometimes you get some really weird things about like cute little monsters made of human fat, or weird pig creatures in Depression era Manhattan. I mean, that was an okay episode. Like, I mean, I don't have as much hate towards that episode as a lot of people do, but you know, it's really hit and miss. Like, you have to kind of, if you're gonna watch that show at any point, you're gonna have to sort of live with the fact that there's a lot of bad episodes, and like they're just kind of entertaining for their own sake, because you can watch them for the acting or the weird antics or for whatever. And then occasionally there's going to be some gold in there. And I mean, even the gold is like, it's pop culture gold. But what you going to do? What are you going to do? Yeah. Oh, man. I don't know. I wonder what Time Lord Society is it's all about. On the one hand, it seems like they're like really, really cool and progressive about certain things, and on the other hand, it's like, I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, being quasi-immortal is always nice. But yeah, so I don't know if I actually finished my little digression, which is, that's what this show is about, is really just one long digression about waiting for Hockney. But I'd recommend that, because one, guy takes illusionism to a very, very high level. Two, it talks about, or demonstrates sort of a couple of different things about the art world. I actually think in many ways it's a more interesting and incisive, and obviously it's a much more earnest and honest documentary than like, what's the one with Banksy, Exit Through the Gift Shop, which at this point I'm still not entirely certain whether or not it's a documentary or a mockumentary or what. I enjoyed it, but I think Waiting for Hockney was more interesting and probably more valuable overall. Less of a kind of a gimmick in and of itself. So I think it talks about a lot of interesting things about art and the art world and dedication, and when how that sometimes that dedication doesn't pay off. You know what I mean? I think we're given this sort of mythology, or this myth that hard work in and of itself pays off, and the dedication in and of itself pays off. That like then somehow you get things because you deserve them, like a meritocratic society. And of course, if you've spent any amount of time in the world, you'll know that meritocracy is kind of bullshit. You can contest me on those words. But I mean, I'm not gonna fight with anybody in any kind of public forum over anything, because I frankly have better things to do with my time. But you can inwardly contest me on that. I personally believe that meritocracy really just doesn't pan out, and I think that's a really interesting demonstration of how sometimes you can work really hard on something, be extremely passionate about it, and you know what, you just don't get the response that you hoped you would. I think a lot of people experience that. I think it's part of life. It's part of the experience of being an artist, sometimes to a greater extent, sometimes to a lesser extent. It just really, really varies, and a lot of it's about luck, and a lot of it is about connections, and a lot of it is about your skill level too, but they don't necessarily run in parallel. They don't necessarily work in a way that inherently makes sense, like not everyone's life makes sense. And I think that's just an interesting thing to remember and consider. I don't know, you can sort of rail against that, which yeah, there's something to rail against there for sure. Like, we all want, I think, a fair world. Like, whether or not our understanding of what that looks like varies. So there's something to rail against there, but there's also something to just confront and see and feel. You know, just become aware of. Yeah. So I guess the thing is I don't remember exactly why I was referencing that particular film originally, other than the fact that I think it was related um, to something I was talking about in relation to my professor from college and um, super realistic rendering and different kinds of approaches, to art. Well, you've been listening, you've been listening to this more recently than I have, I bet, because um, as far as I'm concerned, the last 5 minutes, anything past the last 5 minutes just doesn't even register anymore. You know, like I'm sure you have a better perspective on where I was going with this than I do. I mean, I'm just gonna leave that up to you. It's gonna be your homework to figure out what the hell I was getting at, or what the hell I was talking about. Oh man, so let's see, what do we have here actually? I think we're actually not, we're coming up on a point where I probably will feel comfortable, calling it, in a couple of minutes. So we're coming up on that. And what we have here is very strange beginning. Again, pretty much anything I managed to do within the span of the hour during our um, sessions, during these sessions, is a beginning. None of these are meant to be complete pieces. Sometimes they turn out pretty good, sometimes they'll turn out pretty bad. Um, but this seems like a beginnings of a really weird universal rupture. Like, the way I'm imagining it is almost like these are almost like sheets of paper that, like, like a reality that that's like, flattened out, and then it sort of breaks open into a depth that that's sort of occupied by a larger and totally separate um, reality, like these planets here, or these weird orbs, or whatever they are. Um, you know, it's an abstraction. Obviously, that's what's interesting about it. Um, I think that's actually also an interesting thing about Susan's work. Susan Water-Zeller. There we go. Susan Water-Zeller. Her work is also very, very interesting in that respect. Some of it's very representational, um, but a lot of it is sort of a very, very tactile and tangible abstraction, which I think is just fascinating. I very much enjoy it. So ripples and waves, and like the canvas itself, like sort of has you look at it, you almost think it's a shaped canvas, but it's like, all like drawn or painted on, but it looks like someone like sculpted, like out of, I don't know, using like a gel medium or something. Like she has these ripples that intersect and interweave with each other, and they're sort of these, I guess, patterns. And there's some very lofty philosophical ideas behind them, as far as I'm aware. It's very, very interesting, but I think it's intended to be up to the viewers, the audience's interpretation. Um, but I think like abstraction in that sense can be very interesting, because I think when we think of abstraction, we think we think of like squiggles and lines and just like drips, and Jackson Pollock and things like that. But you can be abstract in so many different ways. Um, Patterns are abstract. Whether regimented um, or loose patterns. A lot of religious art, Jewish and Muslim art, Muslim art in particular, is just a lot of it is just mind blowing and beautiful. Um, where there's maybe a prohibition against, so historical or religious prohibition against figurative depictions. And of course, the Talmud and the sort of in the Jewish tradition, that's been debated very hotly. I believe that's what the second commandment, like what that actually means. Like, are Jewish artists allowed to render anything that looks like a human or an animal or whatever? And of course, there's been actually a lot of different interpretations of that. I took a separate class in that in college too, just in that, just in Jewish art. Um, just in basically the whole class was just a big like, what does the second commandment actually say about art? And of course it was a history of Jewish art, which a lot of it ends up being art done by Jewish artists or art back in the olden days. A lot of it is actually Phoenician art, which is interesting because they would commission Phoenician artists to make things that they were not sure whether they were allowed to make themselves. But anyways, so Jewish and Muslim art, that's a lot of it is abstract, and illuminations of manuscripts are a type of abstract art. So a lot of that sort of in the religious sense, decorative, or whether for religious purposes or for purely aesthetic purposes. A lot of that's abstract in its own way. And sometimes you may have recognizable forms that kind of work within abstract forms. So let's see. I'm gonna do something a little bit. I don't usually play around with layers in these videos just because I kind of, want to have like a fresh, just like messing around with the digital paint feeling. But I'm going to put a little layer on here because, to add a little kind of crispness, and I'm going to sort of try to demonstrate something, and I may completely fail at it. But if you see this edge here, right, let me actually change this around. I'm going to draw the thinners down. Thinners in the real world would be something like turpentine or terpenoid or whatever horrible thing that gives you cancer. It is, it thins the paint. It's a paint thinner. In this, it's thankfully just a slider that doesn't affect my health one way or the other, so that's very nice. And loading is just how much quote-unquote paint there is on the brush. And I'm gonna try to see on this new layer, because the new layer doesn't really affect the old layer. I'm gonna drop this down quite a bit too. I'm gonna see if I can create a little bit more of the illusion of like a torn piece of paper. And I may fail at this, but I may not. So this is something called a mock band, I guess. What she called mock bands would be these vibrating places of light and shadow just at the very edge of just at the very, very edge of an edge. So it's something that's about edges, and it's something that you can use to bring out the idea or to bring out an edge. And obviously I'm doing like a very exaggerated version of that, so it kind of feels like this almost has like a little bit more of an altitude, like it's not flat. But I think that's sort of a demonstration of the general principle of how that works. So if I go even further, if I just kind of go like this, I think you will notice that it sort of starts to kind of pop out a little bit more. Just a little bit more. And of course it takes a lot more attention and fine detail work to get that to happen. In a very, very, very convincing way. But you know what? And of course I already have the dark, deep shadows right underneath it, so they kind of the light kind of plays against that. And I can actually keep going this way. That way it kind of layers on top of this, so this is almost like a separate layer now. And again, that's a very, very quick variation on that concept. But I think it sort of works. I think it sort of demonstrates what I mean. I mean, if I had more time, or if I was planning to take more time on this, I would obviously figure out some of the layering issues here. Like right now, everything kind of exists on very much the same plane. Some of the compositional issues, like for example, this brighter sphere over here, I probably would shave it down quite a bit more to create kind of a little bit more of a diagonal movement, because right now I feel like it's too close in shape to this one. I think this right here kind of works, this dark to this dark. There's a movement here that functions. So, it does its job. And I probably would really kind of play up that idea of the weird illusion in the space, either contracting, or like right here, I kind of like the idea that it's starting to like really pop out, but at the same time in the back it's kind of still flattening out. I think one can play a lot with that tension between what feels kind of what's in the foreground, what's in the background, the idea that maybe you can't quite tell, maybe ambiguity or ambivalence between foreground and background. Things kind of vibrating is kind of interesting. Things doing paradoxical things are kind of interesting. Some artists have made their entire careers on the idea of rendering paradoxes. So, I would definitely do a lot more to this with a little bit more time. But this is where we ended up today. Just at about the end of an hour or so. So, we'll see. As usual, I'm actually just gonna put the pen down. Whew. And just take a little breather. And just beat the devil out of it. I'm not gonna do that. It's very expensive. Well, it's fairly expensive. But take a little bit of a breather, and just do the little housekeeping. Apologies if today's session was a little bit incoherent or didn't flow perfectly, which it's just not going to. But as I said, I was a little bit out of sorts, and I think my goal is to try to do these just whenever I can, and sometimes it's going to be when I'm in a perfectly great mood and I'm ready to go. And sometimes it's going to be when I really kind of have to a little bit push myself to do it, or when I just kind of don't really have the energy to do anything else, to be completely honest. So, that's just kind of part of the package. If you want to find some of my other stuff on the internet, I do. If you happen to be listening or watching this, I do a lot of stuff. I am at Alex_S on Twitter. It's you can get to it from the YouTube page. That's Alex is spelled ALEKS _S, right? So at Alex_S on Twitter. My website is just my name, alexsamoilov.com. Again, it's gonna be linked up easily from this YouTube account. My Patreon is patreon.com/feedthealex. So feed like food, the definite article, and Alex again, ALEKS. So feed the Alex. So patreon.com/feedthealex. I make games. I make artsy fartsy, indie-ish game type things, video game type things. So you can find those at itch.io. Well, actually, the Alex, TheAleks dot itch, like itch you scratch, ITCH.io. You can find my work there. Again, I think a lot of that stuff is very easily findable through the other sources. Like if you get to my Twitter, you can find all of the links to everything from there. My Twitter is a lot of very personal rants about mental health and politics, and occasionally art and games. So if you're not interested in like super personal stuff popping up, then probably give that a bit of a wide berth. So yeah, I think those are my self-promotion bits. you can do the liking and the subscribing. I think that's a good thing. I didn't used to do those things on Twitter. Not Twitter, YouTube. I didn't used to, but I have been watching a lot more YouTube lately because there's so many different things around, so many possibilities. It's great. But yeah, if you into it, if you do, you know, I don't think I enable comments, so maybe you can't comment. So I don't know. I'm not, you know, great with. I don't have a lot of spoons, so I can't really communicate. I don't have a lot of like energy or time to communicate with a lot of people or anything, or even any people very much. But I have other venues of communication online. Twitter is fine. You can hit me up. But yeah, like, subscribe, whatever. Do those things if you're into this for some reason. I think that's it. I think those are all of my self promotion bits. So I'm just gonna relax now and play some video games, and which I didn't even talk about video games. I wanted to talk about video games, but next time. Um, yeah, I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna maybe afterwards go to sleep. That's what's gonna happen. So those are the things that will be going down in my life in the very near future. And oh my God, I need to fix this painting. It's so horrible. Oh God. Oh my. Oh Lord. There. Goodbye. Oh my God. No, this painting needs to go away. Okay. All right. All right. That's self-criticism. Yeah. So the goal is to try to subvert that voice and say no to that voice. Don't get all. Don't get all aggro. Don't get all negative, man. Chill out. Relax. Like, it's cool. It's cool. Things aren't gonna be perfect. Everything is like totally, totally chill. Alright? So, like, the negative voice is gonna come up, especially when you're like leaving a piece for a while. Like, oh, I'm not gonna work on this for a while and it's not exactly what I want it to be. That's gonna happen. When you come back to a piece, sometimes you're pleasantly surprised, but sometimes you see all the imperfections glaringly. You know, that's also fine. You just gotta be like, hey man, hey inner voice, like, let's just chill out, you know? Let's just take it easy, man. Right? And on that note, um, I hope you have a good day, night, evening, morning, whatever. Enjoy yourself, and I will see you next time.